Slides up. Right. Okay, so today's presentation really comes, and next week's comes from a trip that Don and I took with the Bartzes last fall. And we visited a number of towns along the Rhine. And two of them had two of the most interesting cathedrals and beautiful cathedrals that I've seen. And the one we're going to talk about today is the one in Strasbourg, which is the picture here. And you can see this huge building with a very tall spire to it. This was the tallest building in the world for over 400 years. You compare that to the Sears Tower, which was tallest for 25, you know, so really is a magnificent structure. Let's see. Okay, so this is a Gothic cathedral, and so I thought it'd be worth saying something a little bit about what is Gothic architecture, and it has nothing to do with the historic Goths. They were a tribe that invaded the Roman Empire in the 3rd century, and this is of course much later. It actually is a pejorative term, and it was first used, as far as I know, by Giorgio Vasari. And if you've been attending some of my talks, at least, if you remember the one on Giotto, Vasari was a Renaissance painter, pretty good one, but you know, he wasn't Raphael or Michelangelo or Da Vinci or one of those, you know, but he was still good. But his biggest claim to fame, I suspect, is that he wrote this biography of all the artists, and that's something that has been very useful to a lot of folks. But he looked at Gothic art and he thought it was barbaric. And when you look at it, this is some of the sculpture on the outside of, I think, the cathedral in Chartres. But you know, clearly, if you compare this sculpture with, say, Michelangelo, you can see where you would consider this to be kind of crude and barbaric. You know, it's wonderful stuff, but it's not, you know, that type of Renaissance architecture. So when we look at this, we have sort of a changeover around 1100 or so from Romanesque architecture to Gothic architecture. And the Romanesque is not very naturalistic. It isn't very realistic in terms of bodies. It's pretty cartoony. In terms of the art, no landscapes or architecture, at least they're not well done. You have in both Romanesque and Gothic elongated bodies, sculpture that is not proportional to what a body really is. You do have an affectionate mother and child in both of them, but you know, depictions of Mary with Jesus. But Jesus and all infants are always sort of like shrunken adults. And these, you know, they're not realistic infants. For the Gothic, you have not very good backgrounds. The stuff that is, things that are most important are largest. So if Jesus is in a picture, he's always the biggest guy there by far. And the main thing that I think we take home from Gothic is the stained glass. Because in these cathedrals, this is where you really see this flowering of stained glass. And this is due to the changes in the building techniques. So the Romanesque, which dominated things, particularly from like 1050 to 1200, has semicircular arches, relatively massive walls, and consequently very small openings for natural light into them. So they're gloomy. And this type of architecture is sometimes referred to as Norman, particularly if you're in England, because the Normans, of course, when they invaded in 1066, brought this architecture over to England, and so some of the early English cathedrals and things are Romanesque. But that Gothic rapidly replaced this, and it replaced it for a number of reasons, and mainly it was so much lighter and brighter, and really gave you the idea that when you were in there worshiping, you were reaching for heaven. So this is just to give you an example of a Romanesque church, and you can see there's some windows, virtually none on the first floor. Up above a few, but not much really when you look at it. And you can imagine how gloomy that would be on the inside. Well, this all changed in the early 12th century because of the Abbey of Saint Denis. I think that's how you pronounce it in French. Saint-Denis, something like that. I'm not sure. But anyways, this is an abbey that's just slightly north of Paris. Fortunately, I've never been there, but I'd like to go sometime. It was a major stop on the pilgrimage trails. It is the burial place for the majority of early French kings. So it's a very important religious site and a very important political site. And it represented the power of both the church and the French king, and it was falling apart at the beginning of the 12th century. So in 1122, a new abbot is appointed, a fellow by the name of Suger, and he really redesigned the basilica and how this was all going to fit together, and he totally redid the outside, and I'll show you sort of a diagram in a second and show you how much he did. He had a really revolutionary architectural aesthetic, and along with his master builder, he was able to pull off in a very short time, and this was really quite short, 4 years. He was able to totally redesign how churches looked. And this just shows you some idea. The original church is shown in the sort of darker black, and it was Romanesque. And then he added everything else around there. So a huge expansion. And one of the big changes is the changes to the walls here. And these walls were knocked down. These new walls are much taller and much more open. And you can see this. The picture on the right is, and this renovation took between 1140 and 1144, just 4 years. This shows the front. It is more open certainly than the abbey that I showed you earlier. It's also much taller. In the picture from the inside, you can see how this extends up 3-4 floors straight up with all of the stained glass that's in that, and how different that's going to be from anything that we had before. So this is just another picture of the abbey, and it shows how it is so vertical compared to sort of the more squat Romanesque buildings before. This gives the some of the vaulting on the top, and you can see it's not as good as we're going to see later, but you're starting to see these more complicated vaulting structures that give a lot of stability to the roof. So what are the main principles here we're going to find in this Gothic architecture? We're going to find these pointed arches rather than the round ones that the Romanesque and the Romans used. We're going to find flying buttresses that sit on the outside of the wall that support it and allow you to go much higher. And that, of course, gives you this emphasis on the vertical and the ability, since you have now very thin walls, to close them in with stained glass. And so you have lots of light in the cathedrals now and in the churches. that you didn't have before. That you have ornate decorations, these sculptures, and this ribbed vaulting, and I'll show you some examples of these. So this is a pointed arches. You can see up here, this is known sometimes as the Gothic arch, and it basically gives you more strength supporting these so they don't fall in together. You know, one possibility would be the walls collapsing inward. So these allow that great height. Is one of the reasons we are allowed the great height. The flying buttresses is the other reason, and these provide stability. Here's the inner wall. This is where your stained glass would be here at the bottom, and then you see these supports to that wall that keep it from falling the other way, from going out. Can't move that way. And down at the bottom of this, we see a pointed arch that stabilizes this set of flying buttresses. And these would go along the wall, so each large stained glass would be between two flying buttresses, and the interior part wall would be then stabilized by them. And this is actually the set of flying buttresses that are on the Notre Dame in Paris. That, of course, gives you huge height. This is just another picture of the Cologne Cathedral that we're going to talk about next week.
Ken, how long did it take to build these cathedrals?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm not sure where we went here.
I mean,
sometimes hundreds of years.
Yeah.
The fast one was that Saint-Denis, which was 4 years. So if you really had the money and you had the power to do it, it could be done in a small length of time, but that's not the usual case. Most of these are hundreds of years. And I'll go over Strasbourg in just a second, but it was really a long time. But the other thing that you get from this is the stained glass. And this just shows one picture of a typical stained glass on one of the walls, and then the rose window from one of the cathedrals at one end. And the stained glass just does wonders for a church. You can see this in our own church too.
Oh, yes.
For sure. You know, it brings in light. It gives you a mood that gets your thoughts on God and what we're trying to do here. But at this point in time, it does a couple of other things. And the most important, perhaps, is that it tells a story. And you got to remember that at the time these were being built, most people couldn't read. Even the rich people, nobles, couldn't necessarily read. Some of them could, but a lot of them couldn't. And so you had to have some way to get Bible stories to the masses of people. And the stained glass allowed that. So not only was it beautiful and brought light into the church and allowed you to think about the kingdom of heaven, but also it told you a story. Another thing that you see a lot of course, is ornate decoration on the outside and gargoyles. And you'll see now here a whole set of these are just fun, let's face it, very interesting gargoyles. And these, of course, were rain spouts. So they were connected.
Yeah.
And the water came out of those and came out of the mouth and sprayed away from the building. And what that did for them was that it kept the water from running down the masonry walls and eroding the mortar.
Yeah.
Actually protective to the church. And of course, they were covered with exterior sculpture. Wasn't particularly great sculpture, but it was there. And it's impressive when you see all of it. This picture shows some of these beam columns. And so, yeah, if you think about a Roman or a Greek temple, you get columns, but they're columns that are just straight up. They go from the ground, they go to the roof. They don't spread out. They don't do anything else. It's just a straight piece of stone or a set of stones that are piled on top of each other. Here, what we see down here is the column coming up and then branching out to a variety of places and forming at the tips then these pointed arches, all of which gives a lot of stability. It gives it sort of an organic whole to the structure, a lot of stability to that. And that gives you these rib vaulting things, and this just shows an example of that. But some of these are incredibly beautiful ceilings. Personally, a number of years ago, we were able to visit the King's College Chapel at Cambridge, and that has the most phenomenal fan ball thing I think I've ever seen. But a lot of these are really pretty like this. Well, we're going to talk about the cathedral in Strasbourg, and I just thought I'd point out where Strasbourg was. It's on the Rhine or close to it. But at this time, 1200, it's in the Holy Roman Empire. And if Richard was able to log on today, he would remind us that the Holy Roman Empire was not holy, was not Roman, and was not an empire. But
Yeah.
it does represent, one of the largest political body, probably the largest political grouping of states. And basically, it's Germany at this point in time. Strasbourg goes back and forth between Germany and France. And that has something to do with our cathedral as well. Oops, what's this one? So Strasbourg, here's a picture of Strasbourg from the air. Got a couple of French flags here. Stole this from somebody online.
Did you take that from your plane?
No, I did not. This one I got online, but I left it in because I thought, you can see where the cathedral is and how much taller it is than anything else. And this is a modern picture. So we have a brief history of Strasbourg. It started actually 12 BCE, long time ago, as a Roman military camp on the Rhine. So it was started to defend Rome, the Roman Empire, from Germanic tribes. And it has a lot of things going on. Gutenberg refined his printing press there while living in Strasbourg. 1566, university is founded. There are now 3 universities in Strasbourg. 1681, Louis XIV and his troops take it over, place it under French control. A little later, Goethe studies law there. In 1870, the French lose the Franco-Prussian War, and so they hand Strasbourg over to the Germans. 1918, after World War I, it returns to France. In 44, of course, it was conquered by the Nazis, but in 44, it was liberated by French troops under General Leclerc. And finally, in 49, it was chosen to be the headquarters of the Council of Europe. And so it's an important political city in that sense. So if we look at the cathedral, the city is really organized around the cathedral. It was created during the Middle Ages, obviously, and it took about 3 centuries to complete it. A long time. All of these things. the spire is 406 feet tall. So that was the tallest building in the world when that spire was completed in 1439. It remained the tallest until the late 1800s. And that just shows you the inside. I've actually seen a picture of this. We'll talk a little bit about this stained glass right here at the end too. And that shows you a picture of the outside. Well, okay, so it was the tallest until 1874. Today, it's still the 6th tallest church in the world, and it obviously dominates that Strasbourg skyline. Victor Hugo referred to it as a gigantic and delicate marvel. Goethe said it was sublimely towering, wide-spreading tree of God. Really interesting things here. It can be seen from rather far away, I think 30, 40 miles on a clear day, maybe, well, maybe a little less. The sandstone that is used in it gives it this characteristic pink hue. So this is a little different color. Most of these cathedrals have marble and things like that. Well, this has sandstone, and it does give it an interesting thing. It took a long time to complete. Started back, and the crypt starts in 1015. That's actually a Romanesque crypt. And it gradually expands, and finally the North Tower is built in 1439. Some of the other things that come in, the astronomical clock that I'll talk about later, maybe next week, I'm not sure, built in 1843 to replace earlier clocks. It's actually sort of an evolution of that clock later. So
is sandstone holding up to?
Yes, surprisingly, they do a lot. I mean, you know, it's like all these cathedrals in Europe, they are continuously renovating it. You know, the guys who go into sculpting, resculpting medieval artwork, they basically have a job for life. Because they're going to be doing this forever. And so it really has a history, though, of fires and, of course, the effect of the Reformation. And let's look at that. In terms of fires, this building here starts in 1015 as a Romanesque cathedral, but then it's changed about 90 years later into a Gothic building. But then there are fires in 1136, 1150, 1176, which was a great fire, total restart to the building afterwards. Then there was another fire in 1384 and another one in 1759 where the roof had to be replaced. And so they replaced a wooden roof with a copper one. And then 1870, again, the roof and the stained glass were set ablaze during the Prussian War. In 1944, 2 bombs hit it during World War II. You know, you can see they're continually having to come back in and sometimes start, you know, back a ways and rebuild it. Of course, in 1015, it was a Catholic cathedral, but in 1529, it is, after all, in Germany at that point in time, or the empire, and they go Lutheran, and so it becomes a Lutheran cathedral. And then in 1550 to 1560, it's Catholic again, and then in 1561, it goes back to being Lutheran. And then in 1681, it goes back to being Catholic. And then we have this real oddball. In 1793, we got the French Revolution going on and everything else going bananas, and they're throwing all the churches out because, after all, it was the age of reason. So this cathedral got dedicated to the goddess of reason for a little bit. And then finally, in 1801, it went back to being Catholic. So back and forth there. Interesting. And that affected the art that was in it too.
Yeah.
Lutherans tended to have less sculptures and things like that. And some of them early on like to tear down sculptures. We don't do that anymore, I'm glad to say. This picture is a picture I shot out of the guidebook. And the different colors here represent different phases in the building. And so you can see it's up early up here at the choir, at the altar and the transept. That's the early part. Then this is added later. Some of this stuff out here is added later. And then very late, this blue stuff here is actually added in the 1800s. I mean, that long. And it was done because you love this. These walls here, there were a lot of businesses and things various commercial enterprises that plastered themselves against the wall of the cathedral. And I guess the cathedral decided that wasn't such a hot idea and basically built walls out a little bit so that they were protected from the noise and from the businesses. This just shows the transept from both the west view and the east view of that. But again, the different colors here show different phases of building. And so this was built over at least 400 years, 400 years here to do that. So what we see when we look at this is we see a lot of height and vertical emphasis on the vertical. That's typical of Gothic cathedrals. We see these beam columns here, and you can see how they're numerous columns in one, and then they split out to form these pointed arches. And that supports that whole large vertical rise there in the church. The walls are covered with stained glass. The stained glass in this church as it stands today is a mixture primarily of more modern glass. These you can see are actually more modern. And that's because of all those fires and everything. But there is some older glass in it. This is 15th century French kings and Holy Roman emperors. And I'm sorry, I don't know who each of these guys are, but we have that as going into this as well. And of course, that was politically important for Strasbourg. Here we have stained glass from the 14th century, and this shows Bible stories. And so it was sort of the poor man's Bible or the illiterate man's Bible, not necessarily poor, actually. And you have sort of complete Bible stories then in some of these. And this shows the rose window, which is absolutely gorgeous. And then there's a set of other windows underneath it. So this is over the entrance. At the other end, this shows the altar. And we have a stained glass right behind the altar and above it, which represents Our Lady of Strasbourg. And this was actually a gift from the Council of Europe. So this is from the 1950s. And so there's still, there's still some very new stuff in here. Okay. So this is the pulpit. I don't know if you'd want something, Monty, that's that ornate. But it
looks like I might have to. I get vertigo or something.
Yeah.
But it's a hexagonal shape. It was done in 1485. It's got 50 small statues on it. And if you look carefully where my cursor is, I think you can see it here. This is the crucifixion. And then on this side, we have the Virgin Mary. And on the other side, we have St. John.
Wow.
And you have the other apostles and a variety of folks carved into this along with this. So, and I think I'll get through the astronomical clock and probably stop there. But the astronomical clock, now clock is, of course, you didn't have wristwatches or anything like that at that time. We didn't have you know, so it was an important function. And throughout Europe, you'll see clocks, ancient clocks, either
Yeah.
in cathedrals or on city halls. And the first one in this cathedral was installed in 1354.
Mm.
And so on every hour, that clock would have the three kings come out and bow before Mary holding the infant Jesus on the hour. Unfortunately, that broke down in the 16th century, and they ended up replacing it in 1571 through 1574. They designed the current clock that they have. That's actually stopped in 1788, but then they went in and repaired it in 1838 to 1842, and that still works today, and it's quite a sight. The clock itself is 59 feet high, so that gives you some feeling for this. It's divided into three main parts, of sort of a lowercase, a central part, and then a small turret up at the top that has the weights that are driving the clock and everything. On the floor, there is in that lowercase, there's a celestial sphere. That is to say, a diagram which shows where the planets are relative to the stars for Strasbourg. Okay, so you can go out and identify planets if you want. It's really quite something. This shows the whole clock, and you can see the folks down here just to give you some size here. And it has a variety of things on it. You can't see all of it from this diagram. One of the interesting things is it has an ecclesiastical computer built back in the 1400s. And this mechanically calculates the date of Easter for any year.
Whoa.
And that's phenomenal.
That's complicated, yeah.
Complicated, yeah. The whole thing is very complicated because what you have down here is this. Unfortunately, these folks were standing in the way, but this is a celestial sphere which gives you positions of heavenly bodies of planets. On top of it, there is an actual clock. Okay, I think this was actually added later. It wasn't. I don't know that was there on the original one. I love these little cherubs on either side. It's beautiful. So you can actually tell the time. It's a 12-hour regular clock. But above that, so that is down here. This here is a perpetual calendar, so you always know what month and year you are. But over on this side, we have a number of sculptures built into this. And up at the top, we have Urania, who was the goddess of astronomy and the universe. So she's up here at the top. Below her, you have a statue and commemoration of Copernicus, which I thought was very interesting at that time. And finally, down here at the bottom, you have a statue of the guy who built the clock. And so you that statue in it. I love it. Okay.
So you're saying it's not working any longer, or how accurately did it?
It is working perfectly. We were lucky enough to be there at 12 noon because I closed the cathedral at 12 noon. So this thing goes off at 12 noon. And I'll give you some ideas of what happens in just a second. But it goes off at 12 noon. And up here at the top, lots of things happen. And what we have here is sort of two, right at the top, two round areas here. The first one in this picture that I took just before it went off, we have a skeleton ringing bell telling you, hey, it's 12 noon. And coming in from this side, we have apostles. Okay. And so after he's done ringing the bell, the whole thing starts moving around and you get different statues coming in. So you have the 12 apostles there. So here's an up close view of the skeleton, and here's one of the apostles coming in from the right. As the apostles are coming in, on the thing above, Jesus is blessing them. Okay? So he's blessing each apostle as it comes in. And during that whole thing, the cock, which I don't have a picture of here, crows 3 times to remind us, of course, of Peter's denial and the symbol of human frailty. It's marvelous. It really.
Yes. Oh my God. And you were so fortunate to be there.
We were there,
Oh,
and they kicked us out.
and they kicked you out.
Because they closed the cathedral at 12. So, yeah, that's wonderful. Let's see.
What an experience.
Yeah, and okay, next to this is a doomsday pillar. So this, as you can see, is a set of pillars here that have sculptures between them that go from the floor of the cathedral all the way up to the roof. And it was done by somebody who we don't know the name of, right? An unknown, because they didn't sign their work at that time, but a master carver from 1225 to 1230. And a lot of this cathedral, this was these 5 years were the biggest time of expansion of this cathedral. A lot of the work was done. This column, called Doomsday Column, it really depicts the Last Judgment. And so you have a number of things there. You have basically this octagonal column with that is very strongly, allowing this all the way up and everything. And then you have 4 smaller columns which are detached from this, and a whole series of sculptures which include the 4 evangelists, include a number of angels, including Saint Michael holding a pair of scales, which he's going to use to separate the saved from the damned. And this is a very common type of display in cathedrals of the 1300s, 1400s in that area. A lot of that was, in some respects was a response to the plague coming through as well. See, I think that's the last picture I have. Yeah. So let's see. Well, it's 1340 or 349 at the moment. If you want, I can go on for a couple more slides, or if you want to just ask questions, that's fine too. Not much.
Well, I'm curious of why they would have decided to build that clock. Was there something about the city or the town, the reputation for?
Most larger cities had a clock, not a lot of clocks, a clock. So if you go to Prague, for example, the clock is on the outside of the city hall. This was a real service to people, because when they heard the clock, and then of course the clock was tied to somebody ringing bells, you knew it was 12 noon.
Did they have a way of keeping it accurate, or
Well, yeah, that's a problem. And, they did have, they did routine repairs on it and tried to reset it, but these sorts of things, yeah, it's well, I will say it did go off directly at 12 noon or
when you were there? Okay.
So,
But yeah, if the clock says it's noon, I guess.
Right. Even if it's 12:05, it doesn't make any
Or
difference.
2:30.
Right.
No clocks at all. And you
Yeah.
can imagine if we all went around with our Fitbits and our clocks, whatever, you know, it would be a real problem for us. And of course, as we progress in civilization, yeah, it becomes more and more of a problem. to
Yeah.
keep time accurately.
I think it doesn't come until actually like the trains go fast enough and go far enough that they had to standardize clocks around the world.
Right, and that of course is also when you have a standardized time and standardized time zones coming in
Yeah.
with trains, and so that's coming mainly out of England, I think originally
Okay.
for that type of thing, but also in the U.S. because we had such a large expanse, you had to go across, you had to have time zones.
I think our bells out on the patio rang on the hour, or at least noon in the old church.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, that would be normal for a lot of churches because those bells would be a signal to everybody in the town.
Yeah.
What the time is.
Would that just require, though, a human being to go and just pull on the rope to make them ring then?
Yep.
I
Yeah.
think so, yeah.
Yeah, in the Middle Ages, certainly. Okay. Well, I'll take this up with the organ next week. We got a couple of more things to do in this church. Let's see. I'm trying to think how many slides I have. I think I have 2 slides of the organ. Why don't we do the organ this time?
Okay.
A little less to do. Okay, so the original organ was here in 1385. It was replaced in 1489 to 1491, and at which time it had this phenomenal case built around it. And the case is stayed with us, but the organs keep getting replaced. In 1714, 15, they rebuilt it. In 1909, it was renovated again. In 1935, they replaced the organ, but they kept the old case. And in 79 to 81, they went back and refreshed the organ again and rebuilt it. So, we've had our own at Emmanuel problems with the organ. And,
Yes.
and so we can relate to this, but they have a longer time span than we have. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this shows you the picture of the organ face on. It's very pretty. I don't know much about organs, so I don't know what 39 draw stops and 16 wind chests do for you, but 2,242 pipes sounds pretty impressive to me.
Yeah, it does.
I guess we need Bradley to tell us whether or not this is an important number or not. But it's an impressive organ. Unfortunately, we did not hear it while we were there, but it's an impressive looking organ at least.
Yeah.
Where would the organist be?
Well, that's a good. Let's see. Let me see if I can go back here. I'm not really 100% sure. The pipes extend over several floors. There's like 3 floors here. And I'm not sure. I think maybe they're behind this screen over here, but I'm not really sure where they are. We did not take a tour of the organ. Unfortunately, we were only there for, basically in the church for half a day. And that was a late starting day by the time we got over there. Yeah, so I don't really actually know the answer to that question. I suspect it might be over here on this side, but I'm not really sure.
Well, we'll Google it for next week.
I'll try to figure it out. I do have a very nice booklet on the cathedral. I have attended every time I walk into a church to buy the book, so.
Yeah,
that
he
really
does.
helps.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for today. We covered a lot.
Yeah.
Next week I'll do the exterior, and then we'll go to Cologne and look at a very different church, but an equally, perhaps even more beautiful one. Donna and I have a saying when we're traveling that you find something that's absolutely gorgeous, you say, "Oh my goodness, that's phenomenal," and then the next day you see something even prettier. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me, let's see. Oh,
Well,
here.
thank you and be safe, everybody.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming, and this will
Thank
be
you, honey.
the website on the YouTube video.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Stop the recording.
All right.
Recording.
Okay.
Let's see.